Section 30 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Section 30. That was his old trick, opening a pocket-knife, thought Sally, always opening and shutting a knife when he got excited. They had been very, very intimate, she and Peter Walsh, when he was in love with Clarissa, and there was that dreadful, ridiculous scene over Richard Dalloway at lunch. She had called Richard Wickham. Why not call Richard Wickham? Clarissa had flared up, and indeed they had never seen each other since, she and Clarissa, not more than half a dozen times perhaps in the last 10 years, and Peter Walsh had gone off to India, and she had heard vaguely that he had made an unhappy marriage, and she didn't know whether he had any children, and she couldn't ask him, for he had changed. He was rather shrivelled looking, but kinder, she felt, and she had a real affection for him, for he was connected with her youth, and she still had a little Emily Bronte he had given her, and he was to write, surely. In those days he was to write. "Have you written?" she asked him, spreading her hand, her firm and shapely hand, on her knee in a way he recalled. "Not a word," said Peter Walsh, and she laughed. She was still attractive, still a personage, Sally Seton. But who was this Rossiter? He wore 2 camellias on his wedding day. That was all Peter knew of him. "They have myriads of servants, miles of conservatories," Clarissa wrote, something like that. Sally owned it with a shout of laughter. "Yes, I have 10,000 a year." Whether before the tax was paid or after, she couldn't remember. For her husband, whom you must meet, she said. Whom you would like, she said. Did all that for her. And Sally used to be in rags and tatters. She had pawned her grandmother's ring, which Marie Antoinette had given her great-grandfather to come to Burton. Oh yes, Sally remembered. She had it still. A ruby ring which Marie Antoinette had given her great-grandfather. She never had a penny to her name in those days, and going to Burton always meant some frightful pinch. But going to Burton had meant so much to her. Had kept her sane, she believed. So unhappy she had been at home. But that was all a thing of the past, all over now, she said. And Mr. Parry was dead, and Miss Parry was still alive. Never had he had such a shock in his life, said Peter. He had been quite certain she was dead. And the marriage had been, Sally supposed, a success, and that very handsome, very self-possessed young woman was Elizabeth over there by the curtains in red. She was like a poplar, she was like a river, she was like a hyacinth, Willie Titcombe was thinking. Oh, how much nicer to be in the country and do what she liked. She could hear her poor dog howling, Elizabeth was certain. She was not a bit like Clarissa, Peter Walsh said. Oh, Clarissa, said Sally. What Sally felt was simply this. She had owed Clarissa an enormous amount. They had been friends, not acquaintances, friends, and she still saw Clarissa all in white going about the house with her hands full of flowers. To this day tobacco plants made her think of Burton. But did Peter understand? She lacked something. Lacked, what was it? She had charm, she had extraordinary charm. But to be frank, and she felt that Peter was an old friend, a real friend, did absence matter? Did distance matter? She had often wanted to write to him, but torn it up, yet felt he understood, for people understand without things being said, as one realises growing old, and old she was. Had been that afternoon to see her sons at Eton, where they had the mumps. To be quite frank, then, how could Clarissa have done it? Married Richard Dalloway, a sportsman, a man who cared only for dogs. Literally, when he came into the room, he smelt of the stables. And then all this, she waved her hand. Hugh Whitbread it was, strolling past in his white waistcoat, dim, fat, blind, past everything he looked, except self-esteem and comfort. "He's not going to recognise us," said Sally, and really she hadn't the courage. So that was Hugh, the admirable Hugh. "And what does he do?" she asked Peter. He blacked the king's boots or counted bottles at Windsor, Peter told her. Peter kept his sharp tongue still. But Sally must be frank, Peter said. That kiss now, Hugh's. On the lips, she assured him, in the smoking-room one evening. She went straight to Clarissa in a rage. Hugh didn't do such things, Clarissa said. The admirable Hugh. Hugh's socks were without exception the most beautiful she had ever seen, and now his evening dress. Perfect. And had he children? Everybody in the room has 6 sons at Eton, Peter told her, except himself. He, thank God, had none. No sons, no daughters, no wife. Well, he didn't seem to mind, said Sally. He looked younger, she thought, than any of them. But it had been a silly thing to do in many ways, Peter said, to marry like that. A perfect goose she was, he said. But, he said, we had a splendid time of it. But how could that be? Sally wondered. What did he mean? And how odd it was to know him and yet not know a single thing that had happened to him. And did he say it out of pride? Very likely, for after all it must be galling for him. Though he was an oddity, a sort of sprite, not at all an ordinary man. It must be lonely at his age to have no home, nowhere to go to. But he must stay with them for weeks and weeks. Of course he would. He would love to stay with them. And that was how it came out. All these years the Dalloways had never been once. Time after time they had asked them. Clarissa, for it was Clarissa, of course, would not come. For, said Sally, Clarissa was at heart a snob. One had to admit it, a snob. And it was that was between them, she was convinced. Clarissa thought she had married beneath her husband being, she was proud of it, a miner's son. Every penny they had he had earned. As a little boy, her voice trembled, he had carried great sacks. And so she would go on, Peter felt, hour after hour, the miner's son. People thought she had married beneath her 5 sons. And what was the other thing? Plants, hydrangeas, syringes, very, very rare hibiscus lilies that never grow north of the Suez Canal. But she, with one gardener in a suburb near Manchester, had beds of them, positively beds. Now all that Clarissa had escaped, unmaternal as she was. A snob, was she? Yes, in many ways. Where was she all this time? It was getting late. Yet, said Sally, when I heard Clarissa was giving a party, I felt I couldn't not come. Must see her again. And I'm staying in Victoria Street, practically next door. So I just came without an invitation. But, she whispered, tell me, do. Who is this? It was Mrs. Hilbery looking for the door. For how late it was getting. And, she murmured, as the night grew later, as people went, one found old friends, quiet nooks and corners, and the loveliest views. Did they know, she asked, that they were surrounded by an enchanted garden? Lights and trees and wonderful gleaming lakes and the sky. Just a few fairy lamps, Clarissa Dalloway had said, in the back garden. But she was a magician. It was a park. And she didn't know their names, but friends she knew they were. Friends without names, songs without words, always the best. But there were so many doors, such unexpected places, she could not find her way. Old Mrs. Hilbery, said Peter. But who was that? That lady standing by the curtain all the evening without speaking. He knew her face, connected her with Burton. Surely she used to cut up underclothes at the large table in the window. Davidson, was that her name? Oh, that is Ellie Henderson, said Sally. Clarissa was really very hard on her. She was a cousin, very poor. Clarissa was hard on people. She was rather, said Peter. Yet, said Sally, in her emotional way, with a rush of that enthusiasm which Peter used to love her for, yet dreaded a little now, so effusive she might become. How generous to her friends Clarissa was, and what a rare quality one found it, and how sometimes at night, or on Christmas Day, when she counted up her blessings, she put that friendship first. They were young, that was it. Clarissa was pure-hearted, that was it. Peter would think her sentimental. So she was. For she had come to feel that it was the only thing worth saying, what one felt. Cleverness was silly. One must say simply what one felt. But I do not know, said Peter Walsh, what I feel. Poor Peter, thought Sally. Why did not Clarissa come and talk to them? That was what he was longing for. She knew it. All the time he was thinking only of Clarissa, and was fidgeting with his knife. He had not found life simple, Peter said. His relations with Clarissa had not been simple. It had spoilt his life, he said. They had been so intimate, he and Sally Seaton. It was absurd not to say it. One could not be in love twice, he said. And what could she say? Still, it is better to have loved. But he would think her sentimental. He used to be so sharp. He must come and stay with them in Manchester. That is all very true, he said, all very true. He would love to come and stay with them, directly he had done what he had to do in London. And Clarissa had cared for him more than she had ever cared for Richard. Sally was positive of that. No, 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 said Peter. Sally should not have said that. She went too far. That good fellow. There he was at the end of the room, holding forth, the same as ever. Dear old Richard. Who was he talking to? Sally asked. That very distinguished-looking man. Living in the wilds as she did, she had an insatiable curiosity to know who people were. But Peter did not know. He did not like his looks, he said, probably a cabinet minister. Of them all, Richard seemed to him the best, he said. the most disinterested. "But what has he done?" Sally asked. Public work, she supposed. And were they happy together? Sally asked. She herself was extremely happy, for, she admitted, she knew nothing about them, only jumped to conclusions as one does. For what can one know, even of the people one lives with every day? She asked. Are we not all prisoners? She had read a wonderful play about a man who scratched on the wall of his cell, and she had felt that was true of life. One scratched on the wall. Despairing of human relationships, people were so difficult. She often went into her garden and got from her flowers a peace which men and women never gave her. But no, he did not like cabbages. He preferred human beings, Peter said. Indeed, the young are beautiful, Sally said, watching Elizabeth cross the room. How unlike Clarissa at her age. Could he make anything of her? She would not open her lips. Not much, not yet, Peter admitted. She was like a lily, Sally said, a lily by the side of a pool. But Peter did not agree that we know nothing. We know everything, he said. At least he did. But these two, Sally whispered, these two coming now. And really she must go if Clarissa did not come soon. This distinguished-looking man and his rather common-looking wife who had been talking to Richard. What could one know about people like that? That they're damnable humbugs, said Peter, looking at them casually. He made Sally laugh. But Sir William Bradshaw stopped at the door to look at a picture. He looked in the corner for the engraver's name. His wife looked too. Sir William Bradshaw was so interested in art. When one was young, said Peter, one was too much excited to know people. Now that one was old, 52 to be precise. Sally was 55, in body, she said, but her heart was like a girl's of 20. Now that one was mature then, said Peter. One could watch, one could understand, and one did not lose the power of feeling, he said. No, that is true, said Sally. She felt more deeply, more passionately, every year. It increased, he said, alas, perhaps. But one should be glad of it. It went on increasing in his experience. There was someone in India. He would like to tell Sally about her. He would like Sally to know her. She was married, he said. She had 2 small children. They must all come to Manchester, said Sally. He must promise before they left. There's Elizabeth, he said. She feels not half what we feel, not yet. But, said Sally, watching Elizabeth go to her father, one can see they are devoted to each other. She could feel it by the way Elizabeth went to her father. For her father had been looking at her as he stood talking to the Bradshaws, and he had thought to himself, who is that lovely girl? And suddenly he realised that it was his Elizabeth, and he had not recognised her, she looked so lovely in her pink frock. Elizabeth had felt him looking at her as she talked to Willie Titcombe. So she went to him, and they stood together, now that the party was almost over, looking at the people going, and the rooms getting emptier and emptier, with things scattered on the floor. Even Ellie Henderson was going, nearly last of all, though no one had spoken to her. But she had wanted to see everything, to tell Edith. And Richard and Elizabeth were rather glad it was over, but Richard was proud of his daughter, and he had not meant to tell her, but he could not help telling her. He had looked at her, he said, and he had wondered, who was that lovely girl? And it was his daughter. That did make her happy. But her poor dog was howling. Richard has improved. You are right, said Sally. I shall go and talk to him. I shall say good night. What does the brain matter, said Lady Rossiter, getting up, compared with the heart? I will come, said Peter, but he sat on for a moment. What is this terror? What is this ecstasy? He thought to himself. What is it that fills me with extraordinary excitement? It is Clarissa, he said. For there she was. The end. End of section 30, read by Hannah Dormer, London, 24th of October 2021. End of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf.